Hello, folks. Welcome back to the Food for the Faithful channel with me, Bill Reimer, your reluctant prophet. Today we're going to discuss how our cognitive biases are enemies of social progress. I find it amusing that those who insist a thing cannot be known with any certainty will often attack those who are informed only to insist that they too must share in their willful ignorance by ignoring what is happening right in front of their eyes, demonstrating yet again that there are none so blind as those who refuse to see. All tyrannies, no matter how one might define the ideology which possesses the tyrants behind it, count on our willful blindness. In fact, they will invariably weaponize the Fourth Estate to carry out their deceptions, to keep us blind to their actual designs. The other day I had an old friend tell me that I must be a conservative, since he labored under the misapprehension that I wished to return to a former time when things were better, thereby rejecting social progress. Since I taught process improvement and transformative business practices in my former career, prior to my retirement, I focused on helping my clients reduce waste, cost, and variation. I found it rather galling to have a friend, whom I care about, misunderstand my position so badly. Perhaps due to the fact I reject the ideological possession of the radical left, some folks might falsely assume that I'm against social progress. Yet nothing could be possibly further from the truth. So first we must agree on what constitutes progress to ensure it is both positive and transformative in nature. First, it must both be measurable and provable in terms of its actual results. All processes are measurable, quantifiable, and knowable to ensure that our ability to measure success must not be restricted by our biases. So let's look at the root causes for these cognitive biases. Tunnel vision, in a metaphorical sense, can be caused by a variety of factors. Number one, lack of empathy. Empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of others. If a person lacks empathy, they may have difficulty seeing things from another person's perspective. Cognitive bias. This is a systematic error in thinking that affects the decisions and judgments that people make. Some cognitive biases can lead to tunnel vision. For example, the confirmation bias can cause people to pay more attention to information that confirms their existing beliefs and ignore information that challenges them. Emotional state. When a person is in a high emotional state, they may be so focused on their own feelings and experiences that they struggle to see things from another person's perspective. 4. Cultural differences. Sometimes cultural differences can lead to misunderstandings and make it harder to understand another person's point of view. 5. Lack of experience or knowledge. If a person has limited experience or knowledge about a certain topic, they may find it difficult to understand someone else's perspective on that topic. In terms of improving one's ability to see things from another person's perspective, there are several strategies that can be helpful. These include practicing empathy, being aware of and challenging one's own biases, managing one's emotional state, learning about other cultures, and seeking to broaden one's experiences and knowledge. There is an old saying in Havamal, Odin's words of wisdom from the poetic Edda, that en vitlos man vet alt han truer mellem fjellene hvor han bor, or a foolish man believes everything he knows between the two mountains where he dwells. I believe Odin's warning applies quite well in this instance, despite it not originating from a biblical source. The great problem we have in combating totalitarianism is that we have never come to terms with how truly infectious the parasitical ideas are which possess our ideological enemies. There can be no underestimating the hold that parasitical beliefs have on people's minds, nor can what people think be defeated on the field of battle. Here in the West, we have returned like dogs to their own vomit, to illiberal and authoritarian ideas which have been kept alive by the very institutions that we have entrusted to guard us from them. By doing so, we have managed to place a fox in charge of the henhouse that lays the eggs which hatch our liberties. All the worst ideas which originated in the 19th century that led to the murder of millions in the 20th century are still possessing the lecture halls of the academy in the 21st century. This has led to parasitical ideation capturing the hearts and minds of many today. We are being confronted with an imminent ideological disaster which we are ill prepared to face, a social and spiritual ruin where even our own families and friends will become our ideological enemies. Remarkably, there isn't a single example among any of the ideologies to which I am referring that will not require us to surrender our individuality and autonomy to the state-run collective. These include the neo-Marxist critical theory being taught in every university as viable political theory, the corporate fascism on display in the WEF, among other unelected globalist organizations, which dictate to sovereign nations how they must conduct their internal affairs, or even to political Islamism and the Islamic caliphates they intend to establish under Sharia law. Oddly, all appear to cooperate with one another, despite their differing agendas. So, I promise, by the power of the Almighty, to commit myself as long as God gives me breath to find the right words to expose the dreaded false doctrines which are now possessing the minds of hearts of a great many here in the West. I will never allow myself to remain silent in the face of them. My godly ancestors came to Upper Canada long before we had become a dominion to help found a Christian nation under God, where peace, order, and good government would be its legacy. There is much that could have been done to build upon that foundation, the foundation they labored to lay. Yet we as a nation have chosen to do the diametric opposite. Subtitled, The Role of the Church is to resist satanic lies. In the face of this attack on godly beliefs, the church has remained largely ignorant and silent about the leading ideological lies of our time. It is the very task of churchmen and women to stand against all false doctrines which fly in the face of the truth of the gospel. Yet today we have a weak church looking for escape from persecution. I want to remind you of that great martyr of the church, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who began to oppose the Nazi regime from its early days. He was involved in protests against the regime, especially its anti-Semitism, from the first days of the Nazi accession to power in 1933. Despite an 18-month absence, during which he served as pastor of two small German congregations in London from 33 to 35, Bonhoeffer became a leading spokesman for the Confessing Church, the center of German Protestant resistance to the Nazi regime. His opposition to the Nazis was based on their godless ideology, which was in direct conflict with his Christian beliefs. More on Bonhoeffer's legacy. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a German Lutheran pastor, theologian, and anti-Nazi dissident. He was a key founding member of the Confessing Church, and his writings on Christianity's role in the secular world have become widely influential. Bonhoeffer was accused of being associated with a July 20th plot to assassinate Adolf Hitler. He was tried along with other accused plotters, including former members of the Abwehr, the German military intelligence office. He was executed by hanging on April the 9th, 1935, during the collapse of the Nazi regime. There's also a biography about Bonhoeffer written by Eric Metaxas. In this book, Metaxas explores both strands of Bonhoeffer's life, the theologian and the spy, and draws them together to tell a searing story of incredible moral courage in the face of monstrous evil. Let's examine the following Letter to the American Church by Eric Metaxas, which may be found at the following link. It's in the blog. If you're watching the video on YouTube, just open up the link and it'll take you to the blog so that you may read all of my words and look at all of the sources from which I drew this information. From that book's foreword, Letter to the American Church, the author of a best-selling biography of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Eric Metaxas, reveals the haunting similarities between today's American church and the German church of the 1930s. Echoing the German martyr's prophetic call, he exhorts his fellow Christians to repent of their silence in the face of evil. An attenuated and unbiblical faith based on what Bonhoeffer called cheap grace has sapped the spiritual vitality of millions of Americans. Paying lip service to an insipid evangelism, they shrink from combating the evils of our time. Metaxas refutes the pernicious lie that fighting evil politicizes Christianity. As Bonhoeffer and other heroes of the faith insisted, the church has an irreplaceable role in the culture of a nation. It is our duty to fight the powers of darkness, especially on behalf of the weak and the vulnerable. Silence is not an option. God calls us to defend the unborn, to confront the lies of cultural Marxism, and to battle the globalist tyranny that crushes human freedom. Confident that this is His fight, the church must overcome fear and enter the fray, armed with the spiritual weapons of prayer, self-sacrifice, and love. That's the end of the foreword from that book. My closing thoughts. About a decade ago, while still residing in Norway, I read Mikkel Clare Neeson's book, Manipulism and the Weapon of Guilt, Collectivism Exposed, which Mikkel calls the utmost controversial expose and carefully detailed description of the awful emotional mind game that facilitates communism, socialism, fascism, and social liberalism known as collectivism. My personal experiences of life in Norway and my encounter with the authorities convinced me that I could no longer ignore what had confronted me on a daily basis while living there. The book itself exposes Denmark, the supposed happiest nation on earth, for what it truly is, collectivism's biggest propaganda host. But all of Scandinavia was in the grip of the same mindset. Norway was certainly little different in its cloying social demand for conformity to the state-run consensus. Yet the state itself could never make its demands clear in such a manner that would permit me to know my next move to avoid running into trouble. In his book, Danish author Mikkel Clare Neeson tells the hidden facts and realities of life in Denmark's democratic socialism that they never want you to know. I am here to tell you why I abhor social collectivism, but moreover to define the hideous, godless nature of it. Like Bonhoeffer, I am witnessing an attenuated and unbiblical faith based on what he called cheap grace, which has sapped the spiritual vitality of millions of Americans, Canadians, and indeed a disturbing many throughout the West. Paying lip service to an insipid evangelism, they shrink from combating the evils of our time. Repeatedly, I have offered my help to pastors to assist them in developing speaking series on the prevailing culture wars, but not one of them has accepted my offer, although it obviously still stands. Today we have a destructive, escapist theology that teaches people to hunker down until Jesus returns to take them out of persecution. But they do not hold God's clock. We are admonished to be about the work of God until he returns. By ignoring this, the church is choosing to sit on the fence, forgetting, of course, that the devil owns the fence. Bonhoeffer warned the German churches in the early 30s, when they still had the power to stop Hitler, yet they refused to listen to his warnings. Today is our Bonhoeffer moment. If the church should only choose to take a stand against the culture war, we have the spiritual power to stop this emergent tyranny, since the very gates of hell cannot prevail against us. However, if the church continues with its current silence and pandering to the wicked rhetoric being fomented by the critical theorist culture warriors, what remains of the Christian West will shrink back into unspeakable tyranny, a tyranny which will far exceed the worst horrors of the 20th century. I will not keep silent, no matter how many addle-brained musicians demand that I hold my tongue. The lie that these idea pathogens constitute social progress is such a fallacy that I find it remarkable anyone can succumb to them, let alone my fellow Christians. Those are my thoughts today. These are things to think and pray about. Very, very serious things to think and pray about. Leave your comments. Invite me to argue with you. If you're a pastor, reach out to me and I will help you develop a speaking series on cultural Marxist critical theory, postmodernism, whatever else you may wish to discuss with your fellowships. God bless you and have a wonderful day.